Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Digitisation session, the last session of today. So first up, we've got David Yuan, who's covering 2 sessions. So he's also going to be covering for Regina in our third. Apologies. Dean is covering 2 sessions today.
No, the session is tomorrow.
Lovely. Anyway, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is David, representing Australian National Insect Collection. Here in my talk, I'll be sharing with you the type digitization project that ANIC has. And I'll talking to you about the pipeline, the workflow, who's involved, just a little quick picture about what that type project is. So first, valuable items in collection in museums. When you think of the valuable items, what do you think of? Like, is it jewelries? Is it like historically important pieces? Famous painting? The most famous example, probably the Mona Lisa from Louvre. And you can never put price tags on any of these items, how much they're worth. And so when you think about it, it makes you wonder, for an insect collection, what's the equivalent? So the Mona Lisa to our insect collection is type specimens, which are the most scientifically and historically important materials for a natural history collection. So what are type specimens? Type specimens are the name-bearing representatives for insect species. So they can be served as the foundation of taxonomy, used for classifying, naming, identifying species, and so on. So they are very, very important and irreplaceable. And in this talk, when I refer to type specimens, I'm mainly talking about the primary types. That's referring to holotypes, syntypes, lectotype, and neotype. So ANIC, Australian National Insect Collection, we have 12 million specimens. And within those 12 million specimens, we have around 19,000 primary types. That's a lot of the types that we have. So that makes ANIC the largest insect collection in the Southern Hemisphere, which is also the largest depository for Australian type specimens. So with this vast, valuable collection, we don't want them just, well, they can be sitting at home looking pretty, that's nice, but I want to make them a little bit more useful, you know? So ANIC over the years has provided countless resources and support to entomological studies. So that's why we are initiate this project, the type project, to we're trying to build a better management and accessibility for these valuable specimens. So for our type digitization project, we have 3 main goals. First, to audit the primary type specimens, which is to physically locate them, checking the type list, and also assess the type status, confirming the names. That's for a long-term safety and better management. And second, we want to document, we want to photograph, we want to database every single one of these primary types. And the last, we want to establish their molecular identity. So we have another project going on along with the type project, which is the FSP, Future Science Project, the high throughput collection genomics, try to build the analysis for these valuable types. So after knowing the concept of the type project, let's give you a little look on the pipeline and who's involved, which teams contributed to this type project. So first, the type curator, which is my position. I'm responsible for looking at these types and maintain the type list, assess the type status, confirming its identity, and also help digital curators, which is the imaging team, with any entomological issues. I'll also work very closely with the curators for any of the general curatorial tasks. And also these curators are also responsible for taking care of the types that are within their groups. And then we have the imaging team, the digital curators, that are responsible for any of the photography, databasing, photoshopping, any of the digital works, and some trained staff also responsible for leg sampling for the DNA analysis. And then we have the molecular team that does any DNA work. So pretty much all of the teams in ANIC, along with the scientists, contributed to this grand type project. And now let's visualize how a type specimen will go through each of these steps. So first, as type curator, I would go through the existing existing type list and then check all the drawers or the specimens, checking the specimens labels against mainly the original papers. Also sometimes using our show fauna directory to making sure that the identity is correct. It has the right type status. It has the right name. And then it is for sure actually the type specimen that we were looking at. And once we found this specimen, we will segregate it. I'll pull it out of the collection into a small uni tray that has a header label listing its type status, its information, names, authors, and so on. And then these small uni trays will be put together into a type drawer, and then these drawers will be sent to the imaging team. And then digital curators will then take over to do any of the digital works. So we mainly image with the system Giga Macro system. It's allowing us to, along with the camera, like DSLR cameras, mirrorless cameras, so it's allowing us to produce high throughput and high resolution focal stacked images. It's also capable of doing imaging multiple specimens at once, and then also do stitched imaging with its 3-dimension movements capability. And we also use Zerion Stacker to do the focal stack images. And usually for a type specimen, we'll have a standard dorsal and lateral shots. And we will also image the labels, the header labels, and then with very minimal post-imaging processing. Now here you're looking at a couple images of our digital curators working at their stations, imaging the type specimens. And these are some of the type specimens, they have to have very careful handling, especially with the type moth types. Some Lepidopteran types, they have that wings that's so fragile, even just pulling them out from the drawers with a little wind, it just goes in the air. And then here you're looking at a standard set of type images for the type specimens. So we have, again, the label shots with the header labels, and then the specimens with the lateral and dorsal view. Here I'm only showing the lateral, but we usually have both the lateral and dorsal. And only upon specific request, we would image specific characteristic shots. And the last stop for a type specimen in the imaging room would be the leg sampling for DNA analysis. That's if the specimen's condition is deemed well enough. And also upon discussion with the scientists of its group that we think, yes, it's doable, and they agreed on doing so, then we would do the leg sampling by the trained staff, and then these samples will be sent to the molecular team. So, and next is a little workflow showing you how a type specimen will be utilized. So first, again, the type assessment segregation, and then once it's imaged, we'll produce a set of images. And then the specimen information, the images will be database, specimen used for DNA analysis, and then the images itself will be used for public outreach and any research works. So in a way, we are trying to transforming this valuable information of this valuable specimen to a digital world. And since the kickoff of the type project, imagine 19,000 specimens running into all sorts of different issues, like the labor issue, technical issue with the cameras, with various different kind of insects. So since that happened, we purchased the Giga Macro system, and ever since then, we have the photograph trainings, and then we have for the staff, and then we start picking up the paces. And then we hired 6 more digital curators, purchased the second Giga Macro system. That's when we start really making that big progress on digitizing these type specimens. And as a type curator, as a type curator, the biggest challenge I've faced is the ambiguous type status, especially the ambiguous type status descriptions. Because you can imagine, like, these type specimens can be really old, collected, described in 1900s, early 1900s, 1800s, and these different papers, different authors, even different insight groups, these can all affect how it's described. And these contexts can be interpreted very incorrectly sometimes. I'll show a quick example of the species Charis simplicipinus. According to the description based on the International Code of Zoology Nomenclature, should belong to a syntype series. But as you can see on the right-hand side for that label image, it was incorrectly identified as a paratype and holotype. That's why it has a false information in our database and also false label attached to our specimen. But thankfully, with this type of situation in ANIC, there's not a shortage of experienced entomologists. You know, entomologists like to come to work even after they're retired. So we have a lot of brilliant entomologists, and I want to make a special thanks to Dr. Bruce Holliday, that I spent countless hours discuss with him, and he guided me so much on dealing with these type of situations. And now we were able to kind of create a standard to kind of tackle these tricky situations. And as of 2024, we finished the 2 major groups in ANIC. That is the Coleoptera and the Leptoptera. And also many, many small groups, such as Platodia, Methodia, Neuroptera, and so on. We finished assessing of these types and imaging them. And that's more than, it's still going now, so that's more than 12,881 primary types. That's including the same type series. And that's more than 30,000 images. We're still figuring out how to deal with the data storage and images and that. And that's more than 50% of the type specimens that are on the list. That's finished right before the relocation of the building. Right now, ANIC is going through a relocation. It's literally this minute they are moving, transferring all the specimens into a new building. So what's next for us? First, of course, safely transferring these specimens to the new building. Fingers crossed, no any damages and stuff. And then when I'm looking at the finishing up, assessing and imaging of the pin specimens, and then we can move on to look at the type slides and the ethno-preserved type specimens. So slowly and steadily, we are making every type count. And thank you. And if you have any questions.
Thank you. So I think we've got time for one question. Can you come to the microphone? Sorry. It's a bit of a squeeze in here today.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Field Museum just purchased our own Gigamacro, and I was curious to know how you were, you briefly slid past we're figuring out how to manage the number of images. Yeah. I'm kind of curious what you're doing now and what your steps are with that many images moving forward.
We actually are, the digital team actually create a whole new project to kind of tackle these issues. So now they're still going through the steps and where they want to store it, talking to the IT people. So it's still an ongoing issue for us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Alyson, you're up next.
Cool. All right, I'm not as tall. All right, so mine is also about bug digitization, but what to do if you are broke and have zero space, which is the case for many of us, I imagine, or that you have limited staff, which is a situation all of us will be in at one point, probably, unless we're certainly very lucky. So our current problem is insect collections are huge and they're complicated, but they're really, really important. And we have a lot of cool specimens that have zero digital context for how they exist within space. Like they have all these really nice labels, but you can't share them online. Nobody knows that they're there, and nobody can look at them or access them for research. And so earlier this year, our very, very overwhelmed collections manager of entomology comes to me, and her office is just like, she's barricaded herself in those entomology boxes. And she's like, all right, well, I've got another collection coming that's like Riker mounts and a bunch of really interesting material. And she returns to me the next week, and she's like, all right, we got another collection coming. This is somebody who did not want to deal with me and my digitization projects before this point in time, but she was, I think, slowly burying herself alive at this process. And then I returned a month ago, and she's like, all right, we're getting like 100 entomology boxes, and they're lining the hallways of just like all these beautiful, beautiful insects. And before I left, I walked into her office, and she's like, we're getting more stuff. And I'm like, where are you going to put this all? When I asked approximately how many we had, she's like, we don't know. They never counted. There's no written catalog. There's nothing. Like, the context is all on these little teeny tiny labels. They're mostly Lepidoptera and Microlepidoptera, so I understand the concern of, like, you pull them off and they just break themselves. Especially dragonflies. They are the bane of my existence, which is ironically most of this collection. Go figure. So yeah, no digitalization. So our problem is, how do we tackle these very unique situations? So our first step to convince her of the feasibility of different sort of low budget automations and sort of utilizing what we had to capture data and images of these specimens was with Riker mount specimens. So how many of you guys know what a Riker mount is? I meant to include a picture and then completely spaced. So Riker mounts are sort of these black boxes with enclosed specimens. They're taped in there, and she deemed it was both A, too much trouble, and too risky to the specimen to remove and repin them. And we had like 85 of them. They live in a filing cabinet. It's like 1,000 butterflies and moths of the world. And so we decided to use a method I'd previously used for leeches. Long story there. Ask me about that another time. Using a flatbed scanner to capture high resolution images of anywhere from 120 to 300 DPI to 1,200 DPI, depending on how complex the specimen was. And included as part of that Epson software is an auto-splitting software, so you can draw boundary boxes around your specimens to separate them out according to catalog numbers. So they all kind of come out looking like this, but you can get really good resolution and detail through the glass on the Riker mounts. So I would like to add, they were in Riker mounts because the entomologist who had collected them had cerebral palsy towards the end of his life and wanted to still engage with his collection, which is really sweet, I think. So it was about 1,108 Lepidoptera, give or take. And so we came up with, like, okay, we've got like 500,000 of these tiny mounted dudes. We don't have anybody actively imaging. She keeps stealing my students that are supposed to do imaging to do other things like databasing, which is vitally important, but it's long and it's a thorough process. So my thought was, how can we use what we already have, which is this lovely system. It's about 10 years old. It's a stacked imaging system. And it's, we use the Reen Stacker as well, which is an awesome software, and they're great folks to work with. But how can we work within this space? So not pictured here is my many other attempts and prototypes. They're all kind of ugly, I'm sorry in advance, but this is what we had to work with. So our first attempt was trying to do a square grid and seeing if we could use Inselect, which I think was developed by NHM in London, to sort of separate them out, and so we can do vertical stacking on all of our specimens. That ended up with us on some very tall ladders and was not super efficient. Really funny pictures though. So like, what else can we do to move it within space? So I had bought this Lazy Susan to do 3D modeling of fossils. So it's an automated Lazy Susan. It's set to go on 1/8 increments, or you can control it with a little microscope setup. But you can set up basically a rotating wheel so it moves the specimens in and out of frame. So you're not having to like do them one by one, which is still perfectly feasible if that's what you have the capacity to do. But it's set up to be modular, so you can make it taller or shorter depending on the heights of your specimen, the heights of your labels, and things like that. This is the ugly version. I promise it looks a lot better now. Our problem with this first prototype that we tested with like sample specimens, like the cool stuff everybody shows that nobody has any information about, labels come flying off foam really easy. Yeah, you can fix that with ultra suede. Highly recommend. But because it's set up on our stacked imaging system, we can do stacked and flat imaging simultaneously. And it does actually make it just a little quicker because you're not setting up and pulling down specimens all the time. I know there is a risk for like somebody messing up the labels, but I trust our people, and most of it's me and our lovely volunteer Amelia. I think everybody needs an Amelia. She's an amazing photographer. She's like been volunteering at the museum since she was 12. And she's always willing to put up with my zany schemes. But we actually did the math to see if it was faster than our current setup, in which we could do a specimen in about, if it was a Lepidoptera, maybe about 10 minutes or so. If it was a coleoptera or something more complex, it would take maybe anywhere from like 15 to 30 minutes for a really nice stacked image, which not everything needs to be a really nice image if what you want to know is what's the specimen's deal, what's its collecting information, most of which we did not know for this incoming collection. And according to our time calculations, one volunteer, and this is averaged between a volunteer I conscripted who had specimen handling experience but no imaging experience, and Amelia, who's a wizard, can do about 500 smaller specimens in about a 3-hour shift. So an average of anywhere from about a specimen a minute to a specimen in about 2.5 minutes. And that's including taking off the labels, putting them on the wheel, taking the photos, and taking them off. It's a little bit more of an extended timeline if you're going to take those stacked images, but because of the way it's set up, you can configure it to take both your dorsal and your lateral shots as well, with the label in the same frame, so you don't have to do that post-processing step, but if you want to separate it out, go for it. I'm not gonna judge you. Our current procedure is, like for the rest of our collections, is we take these label images and then upload them to our Digivolve projects on Atlas of Living Australia, which are seeing like huge rates of transcription usage and then in-house validation to double check that the data is all there. Currently, we complete about 450 records in a month, although that number is probably off. And we realized that due to the spotty nature of volunteers and students, especially over the summer, we ran out of images to be transcribed, and that was really our big problem. Is, if you lose public interest, you've got to gain it back again with more projects, and that requires more work on your end to do it. So slowly building up that sort of cache of images to be transcribed, especially with these really big collections, is actually a great idea as long as you don't forget where they are. Yeah. And so our output, a specimen about every 1 to 2 minutes. They're all pretty good quality pictures with the labels in it, and we record with the specimen title and our file name. We have a scale bar that's correlated to the magnification on the lens, so that can all be added in later. Currently, 2,488, that number is very wrong. I haven't updated it, have been transcribed, validated, and imported into our ECDIASYS collections management instance. There we go. And I think, according to my preliminary calculations, we'll have done probably about 10,000 this year at the rate we currently continue at, especially now that I've stolen my student back from her. And so in addition to that, all of these assets with their digital data as they're exported from Digivol are ready to be imported into our digital asset management system, which is seeing like a weirdly ginormous amount of success. So since we've uploaded our current collection of high resolution photos, which is about 10,000 items, or give or take, we've seen a huge increase in digital access to these assets. And it's almost entirely unique assets derived from people visiting via Google. It's really weird. And that number, when I checked it this morning, so I submitted this like 2 weeks ago, is now almost 1 million hits. It's 950,000 hits, give or take, of people looking at a wide variety of different insects, and we need to do more research into why they're looking at them and how they're getting there. But I will not complain if that's the case. And so we're well on our track to hopefully catching up with some of the backlog that's barricading our poor collections manager in her office and some of the new stuff she keeps accepting endlessly. But yeah, and slowly, as we move forward, there are several different things we're interested in pursuing as we try to explore more ways to automate under both our limited budget sometimes, but also to engage our community in interesting ways. And one avenue is 3D digitization. And so I really love 3D scanning insects. I think they're the neatest thing ever. And so our two main methods are Scant and Copus. And so right now I'm working with a international high school robotics league, which I did not know was a thing. And they're helping me build some robots so I can 3D scan insects better, which I think is awesome. And because of that, we're working with them and our local teams throughout the state to build a paid internship for high school robotics enthusiasts to help us explore the intersection of imaging and automation with museum digitization. Both are photogrammetry-based models. You can do laser scanning of insects, but it's a headache. I would not recommend. So what next is ideally, I will finish working out the kinks in some of our buggy and slightly ugly processes for very, very low budget digitization. Using what we already had, it probably cost me $100 total to buy foam and that rotating table, which I technically stole from somebody else. That was me in somebody else's department, to finish our 3D modeling system and to look at integrating object detection to help stop the rotating base so you don't have to stare at a computer screen every time and hope you get it right, but endlessly amusing as you watch students try to navigate turntables. And to explore the utility of auto-masking and other image editing techniques to sort of make a cleaner, more polished image so we don't always have to share the ugly stuff, but we can if we want to, because it's okay if you're operating on a shoestring or if everything's a little ugly or a little buggy, as long as it helps you get your data out there and it's not just languishing in some dark corner of the world. Because that's what we like to avoid as museum professionals, is we want people to access and share our information. And some of these collections had been in other university museums or collectors for 60 or 70 years and never been cataloged or shared with the world, that are vastly interesting, including some paratypes and holotypes that I'm finding that they did not know existed. So, yeah, this is our ugly and kind of buggy procedure, but it's proven to be effective and with less people and a limited budget.
Cool. I think we've got time for a couple of questions, and nice to see a shout out to Inselect because that's pretty old now.
It's still useful. It's great.
It's great to hear it's useful.
It'd be if only we had data to associate with it.
I had a quick question. So if you were going to use photogrammetry from Scant, how would you display the outputs? Would you display it as videos of the kind of rotation, or were you thinking about how you'd display the models?
Yeah, so we've got, thankfully, multiple options. So our digital asset management system, which is managed by our university library infrastructure, has the capacity to display the videos and the generated photogrammetric model as well. And so ideally, I think our director and staff would prefer we do the model rather than the video, but I'm open to either. But thankfully that capacity is built in, so I don't have to worry.
Cool, that's really neat. Any questions from the audience?
I'm wondering how you measure hits. How is that? Is it a scroll through a page? Is it a click on a link? How is that defined?
So I can actually look into that data via our back-end user interface for our dams, and most of it is people arriving at the specific link. So everything has an ARC ID, a specific link that's stored in our digital asset management system, and they're arriving there via Google. A wide majority of the time, the other half is arriving within the library infrastructure itself. I need to do some more digging into that sort of the nuance of what's there, but we can filter out to just unique hits in general, and it's still a weirdly large margin that's just visiting our insect collection. Our archaeological artifact collection, which is also on our dams, has half the number of visits. So yeah, I need to do more research into that, but we can look at uniquely how different IP addresses arrive at those objects.
Thanks, Alyson. Cool. So next up, so unfortunately, Regina Wetzer can't join us today, so Dean will be doing the next two presentations. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you very much. Yeah, those of you who know Regina know that she loves to travel, and so she's very sorry to not be here today. So I will attempt to do this. She's also not here for health reasons. If you hear me dissolve into coughing, I have a bronchial thing I picked up a few weeks ago in Panama that just wants to live with me for a while. So sorry about that. So what I want to do today is take you through a quick tour of some aspects of a large-scale project that we're doing at, well, for us, large-scale project at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County that is embedded within this larger scale project, the Dig-In program, which is a National Science Foundation funded project to digitize wet preserved marine specimens. So specimens that live in jars kind of like this. This is sort of the nightmare scenario for digitizing things. It's wet labels wound up with the specimen themselves in a jar or in a vial, stuffed in this case with a nice lid, but sometimes with a piece of cotton stuffed in top. This is why this was one of the last major NSF digitizing projects to be funded, because nobody wanted to touch this with a 10-foot pole. So there we go. The goal was to create public digital records for over 7.5 million specimens from our nation's legacy of marine exploration. I could go on, but the idea being we want to get primary occurrence data for the marine wet preserved specimens in the United States, and that was the goal of this project. 19 institutions involved, 4 or 5 years. We're in year 4, I think now. We are going to be in year 5, possibly even year 6. We'll see. And the lead institution for it was the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. Why NHM as the lead? We are the problem child here. This is a graph showing the number of specimens that were estimated to be in the collections of the 19 participating institutions and what needed to be digitized, and we are the far left bar. So you got the problem, you get to solve it. So we were it, unfortunately. So what I'm going to talk about today is the digitization process that we did in our institution, which was different than that done at other institutions. As has been alluded to before, these digitization projects are very sensitive to the type of collection, the people, the capabilities that are present at each institution. So each institution in this program has had to come up with its own methodologies, and this is a bit about ours. So our collections are accumulated from many, many, many sources. We are the second largest marine collection in the United States after the Smithsonian. And the collections have come from very, very many sources. This is just the beginning of a list of about 150 sub-collections that exist within our marine wet collections. Many of those are, and you can say that last line, are expeditionary in nature. I'm putting quotes around that. And what we mean by that is anything where these are specimens that have labeling or identifiers that go to some external log of station location or locality information. So we're using expeditionary in a pretty broad sense, but the vast majority of our specimens have that kind of trait, which is typical of many marine specimens that are picked up on shipboard or at specific collecting stations. So what data did we want to collect? And our problem, as we started to think about how we were going to address this, is time. And here is the illustration of why. Our target was to digitize 320,000 of these wet specimen lots. And I'll mention these are specimen lots. In some cases, there are 500 specimens in the jar, but that is one digitizing instance. As was pointed out by our collection manager of Crustacea, Adam Wall, we needed to think about this in terms of every single specimen. So let us imagine we said, well, I mean, as we all know, collector name, that's really important. We would like to digitize that with each specimen. How long does that take? 20 seconds or so to type in, something like that. When you do the math, 20 seconds on 320,000 specimens is 1 full year at 40 hours a week, working 8 hours a day, maybe getting half an hour off for lunch. You get about a week vacation, that's it. Doing nothing but typing in data from labels. 20 seconds is a year of labor. So that caused us to take on an attitude that was very, very foreign to those of us who work in museums. It's an industrial process design attitude to this project, not so much a collection management aspect. First of all, skeletal data. Gee, it would be nice to get lots of the rich data that are all on the labels, but you know what? It's infinitely better to have some data about a specimen than none, because there is otherwise no digital record that these specimens exist. So Darwin core driven, these are basically the sort of fields that we were collecting, a very, very minimal approach to gathering the least possible, most useful data on each specimen. Optimizing parallel data collection also. So first of all, skeletal data collection, avoid moving jars whenever we can. We decided we were not going to be taking jars from the collection areas to some digitizing place and then bringing them back. Removing labels only if we had to read them. Physically collecting the data in one pass. We do not ever want to revisit a jar, visit the jar once, and revisit label photos if we have to recapture data that has to be done later. So, excuse me. We also have some access issues. The diagram here is a schematic top-down diagram of the shelving in the two main collection rooms where most of the specimens are. In that upper room, you can see the shelves. This is compact shelving that moves. We can open exactly one aisle in this room at a time. So that limits very much how many people we can have working in there simultaneously. The other collection room, this one's a little bit more flexible. It's not visible on the diagram here, but some of these are not locked together, as it were, so you can get a few more people in a few more aisles. But there's a view down one of the aisles in that top area. So we were able to conceptualize we could probably have 4 workstations working in each of these rooms simultaneously, so a total of 8. So we went about building these workstations, and we built workstations to roll into the stacks. So no specimens coming out, we put the people into the aisles to do the digitizing. Each of these was set width, obviously, that would fit, and each outfitted with what was needed to do the digitization in place. Specimen data touchscreen, these are Windows tablets running FileMaker Pro. Curatorial supplies to do the manipulation of the specimens. A barcode reader to read the barcode labels that are being introduced into each specimen as it's being digitized, and then a label camera for the instances where we did have to remove the labels and take a photograph of them. Provisioning those workstations, I said, 8 mobile workstations, essentially identical workstations. I also want to give a shout out to this project, if you guys don't know about this, OpenCore Legacy Patcher. As with many institutions, we have not a huge budget, strangely enough, and we have a lot of old computers sitting around. This is an initiative that allows you to put modern versions of Mac OS on ancient Macs and run them with reasonable security, therefore. And so this allowed us to use some of the really ancient machines that we have floating around for not the primary digitization so much, but offline data work. We were able to rehabilitate 2 early 2008 and 1 mid-2010 iMacs, and they are being used as I speak to do data entry for us. We needed to produce labels or identifying tags for this process. It's a lot of labels. We printed these in-house. As was alluded to in an earlier talk, cutting these labels, we looked at the amount of time to do that, and we said, no. And we started picking up a phone and calling commercial printing houses, and we found one that was willing to cut them for us. And so for the princely sum of $800, which is actually really trivial, and when you think about what time costs, we had them cut the labels for us. So this is the kind of machine that's used to do it. This is a laser targeted paper cutting machine with, I mean, this shot just terrifies me. I wouldn't have my fingers anywhere near there. So these were all cut for us commercially. And what we ended up with is a few 100,000 labels like this, 2 sizes, data matrix barcode on each one, double-sided. So we printed them, that's why we printed them in-house, so we could design the printing so that we could have double-sided labels. So those of you who work in wet collections, this action will be very familiar to you of trying to get the label to, yeah, we don't have to do that anymore, which is sweet. And an interesting and minor issue, but what typeface do you use for numbers on labels and why? And so we did go through a bit of an exercise of trying to think about the why. The why is when labels get damaged. How do you read the numbers best? And there's surprisingly little literature on how to design a good number typeface. So our criteria were that we wanted to be able to read labels that were mostly made to go away. If there was a fragment of the number left, we wanted to still be able to read it. This typeface, Bell Centennial, was designed specifically for telephone books back in the days when they were printed on paper. And this is the typeface that was used for addresses and numbers in those, and was designed specifically for readability at very small size. And it turns out that the shapes of those numbers are different enough from number to number that usually with very little of the number left, you can tell what number it was, which is not the case for many modern typefaces. We also put digitizing identifiers on the shelves. So every location of everything as we were digitizing was registered onto a shelf. We can just read that with a barcode scanner as we go along and then start digitizing the shelf because the person is sitting right there. So everything is registered to its location on the shelf and bank in the museum as we go along. So yes, this is speeded up film. We don't make our people work this fast. 8 of these running in parallel. You can see 2 of them in this aisle right now. You can see one of our digitizers who took a jar off the shelf is taking it out, doing data entry off a label, doing a tiny bit of curation, adding a bit of alcohol, putting the lid back on, and putting it back on the shelf. That's the basic action for one specimen. Again, collecting baseline data for each of these specimens. What shelf it's on comes sort of automatically, the specimen ID, the taxon, which comes from the location because these are taxonomically arranged. If it's not in the jar, we know what it is because of the shelf it's on. For those expeditionary stations, like this one, for example, the data entry is minimal. It is the taxon, the location in the physical location, and then in this particular case, it's that station number and then the year that you can see in the bottom right of that label, station number 1197-40. And those are the only 2 numbers that need to be entered for that because we have a log outside that gives what that station location is. For other situations like this particular situation, this is just, crap on a piece of paper. So we don't have an external log of this. This would be photographed. These labels would be taken out, put under the camera, photographed, and then put back into the specimen. And then we would transcribe this later offline. So how are we doing? Right now, our current rate, and so I want to be open here, because this is being done directly into a database, we know exactly when every record is created, and so this is kind of like the nightmare sweatshop scenario of, you're working in this environment. We actually don't share this with the digitizers. We just look at this ourselves on the back end to get some insights into what's going on. The top shows the number of specimens that our digitizers have digitized of late. The bottom is the amount of time per specimen that they're doing. Actually, it's specimens per time. We wanted higher bars to look better. So divided into 2 categories. The green bars are where they just do a direct data entry, so those are much quicker. And we're at about 35 seconds per specimen on that for primary data capture. The orange-ish bars are where they have to take a picture. And so that's obviously a slower process. That's about 107 seconds per specimen. So that's where we are on data collection rates today. So wrapping up, again, it became more of a mindset thing than reality of being collections management people. Skeletal data are better than no data. Working on minimizing physical action to maximize speed. Leveraging of external data. So on those labels that have all the expedition data there and a station number, we ignore the expedition data. We just get the station number. Optimizing hardware and software can work wonders because then you are doing things as efficiently as possible for the particular use case you've got. And also hire 25 great people to do this. We have 25 work study students working at a time on this project. So thanks.
So I think we've got time for one quick question.
I have a quick question. If I can get up fast enough.
I'll give you a quick answer. No. Yeah.
What program do you use to create the labels, the double-sided?
You're looking at it. It was a
hand typed them.
hacky, horrible piece of Perl code. And cool. Yeah, I'm happy to share it, but please
I use
don't look at
Entmo
it.
labels, so I'm sure it's maybe a little bit better.
It's probably better. I didn't know that existed. So
yeah, you should check that out.
Cool, I
use
should.
that for entomology.
Okay, great, thanks.
Awesome, thank you. So thank you, Dean.
So this is me now. So I'm back. So this is a little bit part 2. We had hoped to have a little more separation. What I will do in this talk, since I saw there wasn't a whole lot of interchange at the door here, so I'm just going to keep rolling. Am I? I'm going to keep rolling. Hello, help. Yes. Okay. I will skip this right now because you just heard this. This is the project we're working on. 4 years, skeletal data collection, custom workstations, a whole lot of wet and preserved specimens to digitize. Once again, speeded up video. It's not that brutal. But there, actually, you can see the 4 workstations down the aisle there. That's as many as we can have in the Crustacea collection room at once. I want to delve into some of the guts behind making some of this work. That was a sort of overview of some of the more hardware-oriented kind of things. But this is all driven by collecting data. It's not driven by hardware. First of all, taxonomy. This is a big challenge. This is a century-old collection. Guess what? The names that are on the jars are very often not the names they should be today, blah, blah, blah. You know, you all are familiar with that problem. We are extremely fortunate in the marine world to have a community consensus nomenclator. The WORMS, the World Register of Marine Species, is an extraordinary resource for marine invertebrate names. Is it perfect? No, of course not. Does it have some taxa that are not so well covered? Of course it does. But overall, we're blessed by having this resource available. What we decided to do early on, after some really intensive work experiences trying to pull in names from worms and wedge them into our in-house taxonomic dictionary, we sat around a table one day and said, screw this. We're throwing out our in-house taxonomic dictionary today. We're going to migrate all of those old determinations to the worms determinations, and we're going to take on the worms name ID as our database ID. We're all in on worms. So we basically just downloaded the entire database, which is a little challenging, by the way. Talk to me about how ugly that can be, and made that the back end of our taxonomic determination system. What that means is, because it includes synonyms as well, people can pretty well match whatever they see on the label. It goes in, and then we can decide whether we want to report the essentially verbatim taxonomy or today's taxonomy for whatever definition of today you would like. So this was a very powerful way to enable us to both capture high quality data of what was on the label and represent it in a modern form. So we captured it, we turned it into our own database. As I alluded to, a lot of these are expeditionary records. So we were able to leverage off that, and this is the same example I showed before from this Valero expedition that we have approximately a gajillion specimens from. So in this case, it's a station number and a year. Another expeditionary one, this is an example from the Eltanin expeditions, which are some large Antarctic research expeditions. I don't know, this should be obvious to all of you, this label. It's, the Eltanin expedition. The ELT tells you it's the Eltanin expedition. Station number 1003. In this case, that's all you need, it's just the station. Here's an example of some large survey type of project, things that were done where it takes two labels as long as you have that station, and you can see it's, again, bottom right, SMG 1452. As long as you have SMG 1452 in there, you're good to go. And what if you don't, though? So this was the other thing that we built in and were very serious about doing from the beginning, was immediate error detection whenever possible to the person doing the data entry. And this is expedition specific. So in this particular case, it's just triggered on the fact that I misspelled that first abbreviation. That one doesn't exist in this expedition. You got to fix that. And so whenever we could conceive of expedition specific error checks, we introduced those into the workflow and let the digitizers know immediately that they need to fix this. But as you may have guessed from seeing that Eltanin label and things like that, this is a pretty tricky endeavor. This is not something you can just cut people loose on. It turns out this process of diagnosing what expedition you're looking at when you're looking at a label is very, very challenging. We've ended up designing a whole bunch of training and a whole bunch of training materials for the people working with us, including essentially simulations of data collection with known data and having people go through these training exercises. There are about 35 or so expeditions that we expect our digitizers to be able to recognize and see. There's this manual that exists that they are using on a daily basis. This shows about 4 or 5 of the expeditions and the variety of labels that exist within each of those expeditions. So this is the basic expectation we have of the work study students that work with us. For all other expeditions, if you don't recognize it, you take a photo and it gets dealt with later. And that gradual qualification thing allows us to have people be productive from day one. If they're not qualified on an expedition, just take a photo. Just take a photo of the label, and then one of the experienced students later can just look at the image and digitize it as though they had just picked up the jar. So that allows us to use people from day one while training them on becoming more and more proficient. Getting those expeditionary logs, of course, has been a parallel process for this whole program. Expeditions are given an identifier. This, again, I'm alluding to these Valero expeditions. That has a particular identifier, Valero, strangely enough. This one, it's all typeset. It's really nice. Those of you who are familiar with, OCRing and digitizing things will look at this and go, oh, that's really, it's not that easy, actually, as you start to look in and see if things are split on 2 lines and there's all that beautiful stuff. But it's actually relatively straightforward to digitize from a typeset volume like this. So those we've been able to digitize and have on tap. Some of our expedition data look like this. It's a little more textual, it's a little more descriptive, may not have been georeferenced. These we digitize on an ad hoc basis as we see that we have enough specimens from an expedition to make it worth digitizing the stations from an expedition. Then you have the nightmare scenario. This is the specimen log of Olga Hartmann, who was the polycube curator for a number of years at the museum. And each specimen she examined has an entry in this log, and it's denoted by that eta and then a number, the far left, and then there's some information about it. Usually the locality, collecting date, sometimes other fun things. As part of this process, we do not plan on digitizing the contents of this. We have page images of the entire thing. Our first pass is, we are so sorry, but for each locality record, we're going to link it to an image of the page. If you are interested in trying to find out when and where that specimen came from, you're welcome to look at the page and figure it out. Obviously, that can be filled in later, and that would be an interesting project by itself to do later on. Those of you who are familiar with West Coast biology will notice in the far right corner, we have some collections from Ed Ricketts, who I don't know if you've ever read Ricketts and Steinbeck, but we do have some of those specimens kicking around. What do we do with specimen label photos? Well, case number 1, I talked about people who aren't qualified, who are taking pictures of labels that then need to be entered later. That's really simple. You just make an interface where someone can pull up the image and fill in the expeditionary data. The other example, of course, is where things need to be transcribed. So we have a transcription interface for that very minimal core information that we are transcribing off the labels. Why are we not using volunteers to do this? Why are we not putting it out? Because we have so few of them. We have only about 10,000 specimens like this. Those are being done right now, actually. So we can grind through that with our workforce fairly quickly. For the transcription, we're doing double data entry, and then there's a QC process interface shown here that compares the two for any inconsistencies. An expert person will look at it and decide what needs to be fixed to take care of that incompatibility, and then adopt the record as done. The other thing that we do is for all of the label images, they are taken as photographs with the data matrix barcode in them, but there's no other connection to the data record, it turns out, just because of the way we are doing that data entry. So you're watching my desktop now as we run a piece of software to read the data barcodes and file each image into its own little specimen directory, which is a very gratifying thing to see when you think about humans having to do this. You can see the images disappearing on the right. What also surfaces in this process is barcode reading is not perfect. There's a very small percentage that get misread. We are able to pick that up because we do have the exact time that the photograph was taken, and we have the time that the data record for that photograph was created. If those don't match up, it means something got misread. So we manually look through those later and fix those problems offhand. This one, I think everything got filed, but sometimes that doesn't work perfectly. Ultimately, we do a QC on each record, and the things we're looking for are, does it match the station data? Does it match some station somewhere, please? And number 2, is the taxon reasonable? These are taxonomically arranged. What you're looking at here is the end of a shelf in the beginning, and a shelf that has very few specimens, then the beginning of the next shelf. Do the taxa make sense? And by being able to see the full taxonomic hierarchy, we can pick up the instances where, for the digitizers, where they got a reasonable match to a taxon name that's really, really similar to what's on the label, but is actually in the wrong phylum, which happens. But when you see the full taxonomic hierarchy, that jumps out at you immediately, and it's very easy to correct and fix those taxonomic problems up. And so, for example, here, we're looking at one of these Valero stations. You can also take a quick look at the label, see if there's something wrong there. This, again, would have been part of the training. one would know this is a Valero label by the handwriting and the label size and the label age. Ultimately, our goal is to internationally share this data. So this is happening. We have the full pipeline to do that. Very few of our data are actually out at this point. We have a pilot set out, but shortly, over a period of the next few months, there will be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands following the initial groups that we sent out to GBIF to be publicly available. So a couple of things: ruthless skeletonization to get the job done, custom hardware and software. Planning at the outset allows for that data rendezvous at the end. We didn't start digitizing some of those expeditions until we were well on to digitizing the specimens, but that's all okay because we figured out how we were going to do that at the beginning, and now they're all matching up very nicely. You end up with mostly good data. You end up with a little bit of cleanup. There's some things that are obvious typos, someone screwed up, and you can fix those things up. You obviously end up with a few mysteries. And what we've had to be is very disciplined about not going down the rabbit hole of fixing all of those. We're leaving that for another day because better to get 99% of this stuff well digitized and 1% not digitized than not get it all done at all. I've spent my time talking about technical things because it's easy to do. But everything I talked about was interfaces for people. And that's actually how this is all working. These are some of the people who made this work. Janessa Wall at the top works remotely for us. She looks at every record and every photograph and figures out whether it's consistent, and for the photographs, which expeditionary kind of bin they should fit in. Victoria Westover and Caroline Haymaker are the people who have managed the training, developed the training, and manage this incredible staff of digitizers that we've had over the last few years. At any one moment, we have about 25 on staff, and that is an interesting management process. If those of you who've managed students who actually are in class as their primary job, it's an interesting thing to do. And so the credit for this goes to these people because ultimately we're digitizing for people. It's about biodiversity, but it's done by people, for people, and it's these people who get the credit for all of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Those two talks are fascinating, and it's really nice to see wet preserved specimen digitization because, as you say, it's something that we've avoided doing at MASS because it's a lot scarier than herbarium sheets and pinned insects for us. We've got time for a few questions. I'm going to ask a couple first.
But shout out to the pinned insect people. Pinned insect labels are a horror show too, so I just want to acknowledge that.
I was wondering, what software were you using to read those data matrix barcodes?
It's a library, ZBAR, I think is what it's called. It's a library available publicly and is integrated in a piece of crappy Perl code. You're seeing a theme develop here.
We've tried ZBAR. There's a command line bit of software called Bardcode Filer, which is paid, but it is brilliant. So in terms of the read error rates, it is much better than ZBAR from our testing. So I'd recommend it. Okay,
I appreciate that. I'll also say that I have to say when I look at the images that were misread, it's not their fault. It's like, oh, it would have been nice if you took that in focus, that would have been helpful, things like that. But yeah, I did experiment a little bit with that, but yeah, having the command line ability to just build a script that would just do this and I could walk away was really, really nice. Yeah.
And then my next question was, have you published any of the workflows or rate data?
We have not. So that's something that we're definitely considering doing as, sort of like the formal publication of what you just heard, our story at NHM. So no, we haven't. The rate data are pretty interesting because we do have pretty granular data for most of this, which makes it interesting to be able to ask questions about, is it about special people? Is it about special techniques, things like that? And interestingly, some of it does come down to special people. We early on realized there were a few of our digitizers who were much faster than others, and we actually asked their permission, and we just stood over them and watched them while they worked. And it was very informative. These are people who probably in another life could have been dancers. They just keep moving. They just don't stop. Actually, one of the little clips I showed over the woman's shoulder, she was probably the top scorer in that. she would just come in and just things just kept going, and she never stopped. And it was remarkable. But there's also things that we've done, and we keep talking to the digitizers about when you're doing this, what pisses you off? What annoys you? You can't do this faster. And we try to incorporate everything we can from feedback from the people who are doing the actual work.
Thanks. And any questions from the floor? I'll go with Robin.
That was really interesting to see. What are you using for imaging the labels when you're having to take the photo? Because it looked like a very small unit that you had.
Yeah, it's in the photograph there, it was an early version, which was literally the cardboard box from Amazon in which the cameras were shipped. And no joke, it's a $100 document scanning camera.
Okay.
Because cheap, we had to do 8 of these. Yeah, I'll also say that part of our analysis was things that are good enough are good enough. And so this document camera, whatever it was, about 8 inches above, it's basically a fixed focus situation. We do not try to zoom in on images or whatever. It's a fixed field. You just put the damn thing in, take the picture, move on. And actually, I cropped those images. Because to be explicit, the tray is about that size. So most labels are just stuck in the middle of a really ugly white background. But it is perfectly good enough, and you can zoom in and read those labels just fine later. So
Yeah, we've got not a huge, but a small wet preserved flower sort of spirit collection for the herbarium, and it's working out how we tackle it. So it's been interesting to see how you're approaching it.
Sure. Yeah. I will also say that a key thing, that put it in a box because you don't want to have to worry about the ceiling lighting. So it has its own LED lighting. And because it's in a box, the ceiling lights don't affect it, which is critical because you often have to put a piece of glass on the labels to flatten them. Otherwise, they remain jar-shaped. So.
Thank you, Dean. That was great.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next up is Ashleigh.
Hello, I'm the Data and Workflow Manager for Q's Digitisation team, and I'm going to talk to you today about the large-scale digitisation project which is currently happening at Q. But first I'm going to give you a little bit of background, because clearly not everyone's a herbarium person. So Q houses one of the world's largest and most diverse botanical and mycological collections in the world. And it's housed over 2 buildings and 5 wings, dating from 1877 through to 2010. And digitisation at Q originally started in 2004, and up until this project, which started in April 2022, about 1.3 million specimens have been digitised through smaller projects, which were funded at various points during that time. So this project is a big project, and costs £29.3 million. And there's 3 sections to it. So we have the actual digitisation of the specimens, but then we also have the integrated collections management system, which we call Earthcape, and Earthcape is floating around here, not the actual database, but the person who develops it. All of our collections are currently going into this. We have 2 left to go in, I think. So we have the microscope slide collection, but we also have the living collection, which are also going into Earthcape. It's going well, but we're not quite there yet, and it will be the first time that all of Q's collections will be in one database and searchable. Similarly, we have the data portal. So previously, Q's collections didn't have a online data portal where you could search all of the collections in one go. It's still very much in its development phase, and it's not quite there yet, but when it is, you'll be able to search any of Q's collections online from one spot, which will be like a huge milestone for us. So we decided to go through a hybrid approach. So we have a contractor who digitized the standard single specimen sheets, but then we also have an in-house team who do the more complicated sheets. So we have new acquisitions. We have what we call the Palm workflow, but is not exclusive to the Palm workflow. We also have the orchid collection and the fungarium collection, as well as the exceptions, which you can kind of see next to the orchidaceae word. So new acquisitions, they digitize the new and returning specimens to Q. But if you want to know more about that workflow, Ellie Graves, our new acquisitions manager, is giving a talk this Thursday, which I recommend that you go and listen to if you want to know more about that. And then for the palms, again, not exclusive to palms, is all of our boxed and bulky material and our oversized sheets. And then you've got the Orchid AC and the Fungarium collection. Leader, who is our Fungarium ops manager, is outside giving out leaflets about the mycological collection. There's a lot of Q people here this week, I do apologise. And then we decided to keep the Orchid collection and the Fungarium collection in-house because there's a high proportion of multi-specimen sheets. And in a previous pilot, who we're not, with a contractor who we're not working with at the moment, they didn't identify the number of specimens per sheet accurately. So we decided it would just be quicker to keep those specimens in-house. So the difference between Max Communications, our contractor, and the in-house team, there are a few differences, but there are also some similarities. So our range in terms of number of digitized specimens per day is from 27 to 275 specimens per day, which sounds quite low, but for a single palm specimen, I think the most additional images that we've had have been 13, so 14 images for a single specimen, which is wild. And then for the Orchid collection, the most specimens on a sheet was 27 specimens, and they all had like corresponding labels which needed to be photoshopped so that all of the data was available in each image. In comparison, you have Max, they do 500 images per person per day. So again, wildly different, but the Max Communications team, they take images of the genus folder, the species folder, as well as the specimens inside, and those images are sent for transcription, whereas the in-house team transcribe as well as collect the storage information as well as image. So that kind of explains the difference in those numbers. In terms of the camera setups, the in-house team have a wider range of camera setups. So we use the same as Max in terms of compact and portable light boxes, but we also have the standard copy stand setup, which is what you'd see in an archive situation. So in terms of collection challenges and solutions, so this was a bit of an unknown beast until we actually started digitizing. And so we came across quite a few damaged specimens and supplementary materials, so the likes of letters and illustrations, which are very much part of the herbarium collection and needed digitizing as we moved through, but also the exceptional specimens. So we have, again, multi-specimens throughout the collection, capsule-only sheets where the plant material is in a capsule, and you would want to see that, but then also where maybe too many barcodes have been applied to the sheet and one needs to be removed. Hindsight is a great thing, and I think if we were to do this project again, one of the things that we would do is to determine rates and prioritize those exceptional specimens, and what would we actually do first, and what would we leave till the end of the project, or maybe even post-project, but also tracking progress. So in terms of tracking progress, we have found it most useful to not only track the families and the genera that have been digitized and at what point in the digitization process they are in, but also the actual physical space. We're a large herbarium and we have visitors all of the time. And so being able to say to the wider Q community, this area is now done, we don't need to access those cupboards, releases those desks and that space back to Q. But also we found that we were not prepared to communicate the post-digitization curational requirements until a year or so in, once we started to release those areas back. So saying and explaining at what point, like what data we need from the curators to keep our records up to date for future work. So for operational challenges and solutions, like I said, we are a massive team. So we have 94 members of staff, over 18 roles, and we are only 3 years in at the moment. So what we would recommend, if you were to ever do a large-scale digitization project, is to stagger start dates. Having 10 people land in one go is quite overwhelming, but also to be mindful of the support that you would need outside of your team. So we had a lot of communication with our HR department, and they have been very good and worked with us a lot. But also in terms of training, you want to support the new people in your team, and you want to be able to get them to a point where they can navigate the collection on their own and they can digitize the specimens on their own. So regardless of what role you were in the Q digitisation team, you would receive the standard mandatory 2-week training schedule, and that would take you through all elements of digitisation, from specimen handling, transcription, imaging, QA. So everybody is at the same point before they then move on to their specialised role. This is the same for refresher sessions. So as we've moved through the project, we've hired more people, and so providing sessions so that everybody has had the same training, even if it was initially meant to be a one-off piece of training. And that's also applicable to the Max Communications team. They have also had refresher training, but they have had a slightly different set of training to the in-house team, just because they aren't doing the transcription, so they didn't need the transcription training. They predominantly needed the handling and the imaging rather than Photoshop, transcription, QA. We also have really struggled with space. So we've taken up a lot of the herbarium, and we've actually really benefited from having a hybrid working package. So a lot of the QA team work from home and will come on site occasionally. And that is definitely like a post-COVID thing. Pre-COVID, we weren't considering that. Post-COVID, we decided that that would work. But also additional refreshment space. So Q has a very small tea room and would not fit 94 people. So we decided to provide additional refreshment space for our team, which is not specifically for our team. I'd like to add, anyone is welcome. But also the institutional impact. So the wider Q community has been very good to us and has trusted us with that space and with the equipment and with just like working with the collection, and we wouldn't have got to this point without everyone else. So you can find our data in GBIF, so it's weekly updates. We do have the data pool, as I mentioned, but it's the alpha version and is by no means ready yet. Feel free to have a look and have a nosy about, but please take it with a pinch of salt. But if you do want to use our data, I recommend that you go to GBIF for that. Before and during this project, we have received a lot of support from other institutions and advice from other institutions, and we very much want to give that back to the community. So if you do want to talk to me, I'm around all week, but also the people on the screen, I can direct you to them if I can't answer your question. And then the QR code takes you to the project's website. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashleigh. Any questions? So as someone who is less familiar with herbaria, why would you have so many sheets for one?
Trees are quite big, so you can have a lot of leaves to mount on sheets.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
How did you track the progress for the digitization of the family and the genera?
So that's a good question.
I've tried to do it.
It's hard. So our Digi senior curator botanists initially, before we started digitizing, went throughout the herbarium and mapped the herbarium. So we just had a massive Excel spreadsheet with all of the families, the genera numbers, and then from that, we then had the QA team put in initially where they were with the QA. That was quickly scrapped because that was moving so quickly, so we decided to stop doing that. But the cleanup team, when they pick an area or a family to work on, they will then assign themselves a family or a genus so that we know that even though the main part of digitization is done, the cleanup work is still not done. But once the cleanup work is done, that is when we can release it back to the curational staff.
Thank you, Ashleigh. So now our final speaker of the day, Grant.
Hello, everyone. I'll try to keep it short, but I've got a lot of slides and not a lot of time. My name is Grant Fitzsimmons. I'm the Technical Services Coordinator at the Specify Collections Consortium. So just about anything that if anyone has a question about Specify or something about Specify is discussed, I'm here to help with that. Just to give some background on kind of what Specify is about as I get into kind of how these migrations happen and how large institutions move into it. Specify is produced by the Specify Collections Consortium, which is a bunch of different member institutions that work together to actually support the initiative that we have. So we're the sustained software that you've probably heard about before, and Andy did a great talk on that this morning. But we've been doing this for over 25 years. So Specify is older than me, but the institutions that support us are really fantastic, and we've got some great founding partners here you can see on the screen, which ever since we've moved to this consortium model especially, we've been working with more and more large institutions like CSIRO. We've been working with the museums in Switzerland, sometimes entire countries, government agencies. We've been doing a lot of really great work. Just because we're not going to get into Specify too specifically today, I just wanted to show some screenshots so people that aren't familiar with it can check it out. On the left here, you can see that there's kind of like a data entry form. I mean, everyone's familiar with this in their CMS of choice or whatever system they currently work in. But some kind of attachments, statistics. We do reports, labels, really cool queries. And all around, it's just a really highly customizable software that has really great tools for bringing data in, searching on data, mapping data, those kinds of things. So really what you got to think about when you're going into this process, and this is for large institutions and small ones, is kind of what do you want in a collections management system? So it's one thing to talk about the actual transition to Specify, how that's managed, but it's another thing to figure out what exactly you're looking for during this transition. So this is kind of the theme that we've heard before about managing expectations for users and kind of what they gain from using a system like Specify over a home-built system. And aside from the clear things that you don't want somebody to retire and leave you without a manager for your collection system, there's a lot of great things that you need to consider, like how do you want to be managing your transactions? What kind of transactions are you interested in using? How do you want to query, visualize data? Do you want to have these built-in reporting tools for labels, loan reports? And do you want to make sure you can publish that data and share it? So these are just some things, let's say an example list of what a collection might consider when they're thinking about making a migration to Specify. But this is kind of the groundwork that needs to be done before a transition happens. So we've learned a lot from working with a lot of different collections, and understanding their unique needs has been a big part of that. And typically when a collection comes to us and says, we have this crazy situation with DNA that we need to handle, we're like, stop there. We have some great people that have already done this in Specify we can put you in touch with. So those kind of connection events happen a lot with the consortium. And that's part of the strength of having a piece of software used by so many different collections across the globe. So we try to make sure that we can get insights from people that are actually working in the scenarios that others are discussing with us, so we can actually share the kinds of solutions that have been found for problems. And it just makes things go a lot easier, and it's great to hear from people who are doing what you are doing. Of course, there's a technical expertise necessity when you're moving to another collections management system, so understanding we've been doing things in a spreadsheet all these years, how do we make this work in a database system? That kind of technical expertise is really important. There's also the need to actually effectively communicate this kind of move with the people that are involved. Nobody wants to have a collection system forced on them that they're not aware of or they haven't been discussed with. So actually working with your staff, volunteers, and management to figure out if this transition is right for you. And also working with our team to make sure that the personalized webinars that come with moving to Specify are hosted, and making sure that the kinds of questions and workflows that you're looking for are supported. So change management is really important. That's exactly it with the buy-in from collection staff. So this is just a big thing to make sure that you have people that understand what's going on and you can talk to them about the benefits of what's going to happen during this transition and what it offers. So this is where you say, don't you want to be able to share this data easily to GBIF and elsewhere? Working through, this is not the easy part, by the way. This is probably the hardest part of this transition. Talking about like the specific things that are really going to make Specify work for them, like long-term support, community engagement, working with a broader set of people who actually work in the same system and petitioning for changes to make your workflows. So I've spoken to a number of individuals that have already made this transition with large institutions. So this is specifically from Susanna Papp at the Natural History Museum of Denmark. They had a long process in deciding whether they should be making a transition to specify. And with that, it came with what are the actual advantages of a specialized CMS that's produced by someone externally, and what specifically puts specify as that option for them. And in this case, there's a lot of great things about having a system that's being managed by other people that are actually building and using a tried and true robust model. Sharing data is really easy, working with the data is easy, but importantly, we have the help desk, user community, low cost, open source, those kinds of points. But there's really these 4 major steps with getting data into specify. And a lot of this in this discussion is kind of things that have already been digitized, because these transitions are often coming after these digitization projects have been already started, and it's never a finished process, but this means that data is coming from all kinds of different places. But before we get into the preparing data concepts, I wanted to talk a little bit about the database structure that Specify has behind the scenes. So we have a relational database, which a lot of you are already familiar with and may already use. And that's just to say that we don't just have a single row that contains all the data for a record. We have a database that has a collection object concept with a bunch of relationships. This makes it so that you don't have to have a taxonomy that's just duplicated across all your different records. You can easily say that you have a determination for an object that points to a single taxonomic name. You have localities that can be shared between objects, collecting events that can be shared between objects, geography, and so on. So when you actually set up your database in a way that you don't duplicate data, you can shrink the database size, be more efficient, and improve data integrity. So these collection objects are made up of a lot of different things. So we have the events, localities, geographies, and this is just a very small subset of tables, but there's a lot of really complicated relationships. It gets up to 200 tables. But this is all just kind of the groundwork necessary, the technical expertise to keep in mind when migrating data from one system to another. So this is all really just getting to normalizing the data so that the data can be moved from being repeated in another system into being non-duplicated, so that you don't have redundancy when you have data in a system. So this is probably what this is a good representation of what a spreadsheet looks like, and often the kinds of systems people are working in are going to be denormalized, or they're normalized in a different way than what Specify or another system would expect. But essentially, the kind of learning that has to go into it is just understanding the relationship Specify offers, and then making it so that there's not data that's being duplicated. So there's not that extra redundancy where it's leading to poor data integrity. So we have a lot of different ways to export data, but essentially before it goes into Specify, that just goes through the process of going through FileMaker, Excel, any other database system that exists, and putting it into a flat file so that it can be imported and mapped to Specify schema. Because it's often really messy data, and there's going to be messy data in any form, in any system, we often like to recommend and work with users with systems like OpenRefine, Excel, and Python to actually parse the data and put it into a format that is suitable for ingestion. So that means using something like OpenRefine, which is a fantastic tool for those who haven't used it before, and those who have used it already know. You can do things like transforming text, finding misspellings, parsing names, standardizing dates, resolving duplicates. And we have some good tools in Specify for resolving duplicate records that come up and exist, but it's always good to get the data as standardized as possible before it gets brought into a system. So this is especially difficult when you have a large institution with maybe 30 plus collections, millions of specimens. And this is often has to be done differently based on the systems that all of those collections were already in. But when doing this kind of cleaning, you have to kind of assess at what degree do you need to get this clean? What is good enough for this process so that you're not always trying to clean things and make sure that there's this sense of data completeness that's been discussed a lot already during this conference. So in Specify, we've got these 4 major levels in our hierarchy: this institution, division, discipline, and collection. And this breaks down essentially to say that at certain levels in this hierarchy, data is shared. So within a discipline in Specify, you're going to share things like your taxonomy, the fields that are visible on your forms, you see the collecting of information, localities. And this means that you have to think about this hierarchy when deciding how to organize your data. And that's where it comes down to whether you want to be centralized or decentralized. So in the context of really big institutions, do you want to share things like the people that perform actions in your database, collecting events, localities, taxonomy? Are these things that should be shared between the various collections, or should they be independent? So I've been working with the Canadian Forestry Service, and very specifically with the Laurentian Forestry Center there, to kind of work out how exactly they want to organize their data in this institutional hierarchy I just presented. And this is a question of whether things should be at higher levels in this hierarchy or lower levels in the hierarchy based on what kind of data they want to share. And this comes down to trust, politics, how well people get along, various things that you're all familiar with. But this is one of those, should the other collection managers have access to my data? Should the volunteers be able to see data in other collections? And they've put together some really awesome graphics showing off exactly what disciplines exist across their different physical locations, how many specimens they have at each, who's involved in that process. And these kind of diagrams and working groups that they've put together have made their transition much easier, because you can really understand what the users need, what kind of expectations they have for it, and how this should be organized. There's other conversations about how you actually want to have security exist. So if you want users that can see every record in your database, of course, you have to think a little bit about things like data confidentiality, whether you want certain things to be hidden for others and some things to be visible depending on their role in Specify. And there's a really great permission system that lets all of that be configured. But there's, of course, the conversation about data publishing and at what level do you share this data and how that impacts your data publishing. Is sharing all of these collections together, putting them into one database, going to slow down this process? What are external expectations? There's just so many different conversations in just that alone. But Specify has a great system for publishing with an RSS feed or through zip archives to GBIF and other data aggregators. But these are all pretty major considerations when putting together where the data is going to go and how it's organized. So essentially, there's just a few major conclusions here. And this could be a week-long talk, and I'm trying to fit it in 15 minutes. But you have to assess what the requirements are for your collection. Reach out to people that have gone through the same thing as you, or experts that understand this kinds of transition. Work with people, which this sometimes is the longest, most time-consuming part of it. This can take years, but work with people to make sure you understand how proficient they are in the software, how comfortable they are with this kind of transition, and make sure there's buy-in. The thorough data preparation, you can never keep clean. You can clean the data forever, essentially. You can go back, revisit, and pull things off shelves, but try to prepare it in a way that the data is at least normalized to fit into a specified model, and consider the implications of how your data is organized and what that does for your visualization and your data sharing. A special thanks to the founding partners that make all of this possible, along with all of our full members and solution and associate members. Thank you.
Any questions for Grant before we wrap up for the day? Thank you, Grant.
Thank you.
So, a reminder that tonight is bingo, and the request from David Bloom to let him or one of us know if you're not planning on taking the bus there or back, and that the buses are leaving at 6:15. And with a shameless bit of self-promotion, so tomorrow morning in room B5, I'll be running a workshop on Latimer-Core, the new Tadwig data standard, which is really great for describing specimen lots or lots of entomological specimens or any other group of specimens that you want to describe. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the speakers again.
I have to be careful in how I answer this to be more cynical. So the two facilities that we're working at are Station Collection Room and the the original carefully designed with explosion-proof fixtures and explosion-proof wiring. Since then, the institution has forgotten. And so the institution has chosen to run standard power, standard light, a whole bunch of things through those, despite our suggestion that this may not be wise. So run copper piping through and use flame sweating copper piping, which was exciting to watch. So,
Usually the risk of a big
it's all fine. It's all fine until it's not fine. We made a pretty pragmatic decision to shrug our shoulders and say, we're going to go with it. The exceptions we have made to that is that we do ensure that all the wires, the extensions we run down to the stations, overhead, there are no wires on the floor.